Hello everybody. Today I would like to talk about the brilliant documentary called The Century of Self, which was created by Adam Curtis, and it was released in 2002. Brilliant documentary. Pretty much everybody and anybody that's involved in right-wing politics or internet right-wing politics in England has watched this documentary. Essentially, this documentary is all about the effect of Sigmund Freud's theories of psychoanalysis and his theories of the subconscious mind on politics. It's about, it says it states it right at the beginning of the documentary. Essentially, it says it's how the elites used Sigmund Freud's ideas of the subconscious mind to control the masses throughout the 20th century. And the documentary begins with Sigmund Freud, and then it talks about Eddie Bernays, and then he talks about Ernest Dichter, who was the father of the focus group. And then it moves on to talk about the reaction to all of this, which began with Herbert Marcuse and Wilhelm Reich, who were both representing the Frankfurt School. And they kind of rejected Freud's theories, and they rejected the idea that we should be suppressing our psychological desires. And they said, no, we should be embracing our psychological desires. We should let all of this stuff come out. And this, of course, led to the sexual revolution of the 60s. The word sexual revolution itself was named after a book written by Wilhelm Reich. And so it explores how this created this mass kind of hippie, hyper-individualistic culture. And this upset the capitalists in America for some time because they couldn't figure out how to sell products to these things. But what ended up happening is that they realized that they could sell products to these people, but they had to be individual products. Right? They essentially developed a theory of consumerism whereby they imprinted on people's minds the idea that you have to buy things to express your individuality, right? And so the hippies embraced consumerism, and this documentary explains all of that. And then it all leads up to politics, and it all leads up to Ronald Reagan getting elected, and it leads up to, as I say, the documentary came out in 2002, and Adam Curtis himself is a left-winger. He's not right-wing at all, which is very interesting considering that this entire documentary is just all about the Jews, right? Because the vast majority of people that have pushed forward all of this psychoanalysis, the vast majority of people that are mentioned in this documentary are Jewish, and Adam Curtis seems to be completely blind to that. But nonetheless, as I say, the documentary came out in 2002, but it's essentially a critique of the Blair government. Blair, of course, came in 1997. And so we go through this entire story of psychoanalysis and what have you, and we end up with Adam Curtis telling the story of how in the West, in England, the left expected Neil Kinnock to get elected, but he failed. He was defeated by John Major, and they didn't really know how to handle this. And so there was one guy who predicted that Neil Kinnock would fail. His name was Peter Gould, and he went off to America to study the Clinton campaign. He was kind of like a protege of Alistair Campbell. He was kind of like working closely with Alistair Campbell and Peter Mandelson. These are like the two henchmen of the Blairite regime. But Peter Gould went off to America, and he studied the Clinton campaign. Bill Clinton was trying to get re-elected, and he was struggling because he was very unpopular, because he got elected on the platform of not raising taxes, but then he raised the taxes, and so people were unhappy about this. So they used the focus group, right? The focus group that was invented by Ernest Dichter, that was first of all You know, it was invented way back before the Second World War. So in the 20s or the 30s, it was invented by this Jewish guy called Ernest Dichter, and he created the focus group in order to help corporations sell things to people. And essentially, what he did is he got a bunch of housewives in a room, and he analyzed how do these people emotionally feel about the product. And famously, there was a company that that wanted to sell this cake, this quick mix cake baking set, right? And they couldn't understand why it wasn't selling, so they got the housewives into this room, and they all talked about it and how they felt about it emotionally. And what Ernest Dichter discovered is that they felt guilty, because they felt, well, they're housewives and they should be like baking the cake from scratch instead of using this ready-made mix. And so he suggested, well, what you need to do in the advertising campaign is you should add an egg. And by adding an egg, basically now the housewife feels like she's done some work, right? And of course, probably nobody would think like this these days, but that's how they thought back in those days. And then the product was very, very successful. So corporations in America in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and what have you, they were using these focus groups to figure out how consumers felt about different products on a psychological level, and then they were using this knowledge to create their marketing campaigns in order to get people to buy their products. And what happened is they started using this in politics, specifically with the Clinton campaign, because as I say, Clinton was struggling to get re-elected, and so we turned to the focus groups. The focus groups talked to the swing vote, right? They focused on the swing voters, a lot of middle class people, and they found out like what is disturbing these people. Why don't they want to vote for Bill Clinton? And so they went through all of these different, they got all the different subject matters, and Bill Clinton got re-elected basically on a sporadic kind of mess of different ideas. So there was no clear mandate. There was no clear direction. Oh, I am the leader, follow me and I will do this. No, it was more like lots of tiny little points that would satisfy lots of tiny little groups. But it worked. And he got re-elected. And so apparently this is what Tony Blair used in 1997. And he got him re-elected. And so this entire documentary is kind of a complaint about that. I'm just trying to give you, I mean, this is not the documentary itself is not really just about the Tony Blair election. I'm just putting the thing in context so you understand the time in which it was, the time in which this documentary was made. Like what was the impact that Adam Curtis was trying to have. And he was pointing out that essentially the Blairite regime had just adopted this policy of just having a complete like scrambled egg mishmash of different policies, which appeal to everyone and no one. And so he interviews a few people right at the end of the documentary, and he's just pointing out like there's one left-wing Labour guy. It's so funny how white they all were back then, but there's the one left-wing Labour guy, and he's just complaining, saying, look, this is not leadership. This is not how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to have a situation in which the leader stands up, says, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Do you want to vote for me or not? And apparently that wasn't what Blair was doing. Of course, for me on the right, it's kind of like, I'm sure this is part of the story. But I think the left had a pretty clear idea of what they wanted to do and what they wanted to achieve, and they achieved it. I mean, they opened up the border and they flooded the country with foreigners. They wanted to, what is the quote? They wanted to rub the faces of the right in diversity, and they wanted to import millions of people that they knew would vote for them, and that's exactly what they did. But nonetheless, this is Adam Curtis's perspective on things in 2002. I wonder what he thinks about it now. I don't know. And of course, there's more to Blair getting elected, because Blair, my understanding of how Blair got elected, it was all about them rejecting Clause 4 of the Labour manifesto, and essentially Clause 4 was the clause which which said that the Labour Party has to nationalise industries, right? So because the Labour Party used to be economically left-wing, so they rejected that. Blair rejected it. Blairism is essentially Thatcherism plus an open border and plus more gayness, right? More gay sex and more transsexuality and all the rest of it. And also plus a larger welfare state and plus a green agenda and plus more censorship and political correctness. That's what Blairism is. But economically, it's basically sort of like a Thatcherite government in that they're not trying to nationalise. I mean, even we've got this. Even Keir Starmer's not nationalising the utilities. It's quite amazing, really. I mean, that would be one thing they could do, which I would basically sort of agree with, because I mean, I think the utilities are natural monopolies, and I think that they were built by the taxpayers. We paid for them. We paid to build the sewers and the waterworks and all the pipes and all of the infrastructure. We paid for all this stuff. Thatcher should never have privatized it in the first place, because these people are just running a profit off of an infrastructure that was built and paid for by the taxpayer. But anyway, I digress. That is the framework. That is the frame in which that is the conclusion of this video. But it's not really why the video is interesting. The video is interesting because it's an in-depth analysis of psychoanalysis and the story of how psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud's theories have completely transformed Western civilization. That's why it's interesting. So essentially, as I say, to go back to the beginning of the story again, we have Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud appears in Vienna, of course, very Jewish. Practically everybody in this documentary is Jewish. I mean, it's, the modern world is essentially Sigmund Freud plus Karl Marx. That's the world in which we live in now, because that's what the Frankfurt School is all about, right? But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Cause I'm just pointing that out because Freud is Jewish, Marx is Jewish, and the Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse and Marcuse, whatever his name is, and Wilhelm Reich, they're all Jewish. So it's like you had these two different Jewish schools of thought together, and what do you get? You get the Frankfurt School, which came out of Weimar, Germany, and what do they create? They come to America, and they create Weimar America. And that poisons the whole world, and that's what we live in today. Wilhelm Reich has got to be one of the most influential Jews in the history of the 20th century, and there's a lot of them. But we are living in the shadow of Wilhelm Reich. He wrote the book, The Sexual Revolution. He said, let it all hang out. He said, stop suppressing all your emotions. Dive into your emotions. Explore it all. He had the mentality that you could cure all diseases with the orgasm. He created a machine, it wasn't a machine, it was a box. He created a box, and you would sit in the box, and you would gather your orgone energy, and you could cure cancer with orgone energy. He had a machine, again, not really a machine, but he developed this. He was a madman. He was insane, by the way. He had a thing which you could use to bust clouds. Right, I once knew an American guy, and I sat with him on a hill once, and we did cloud busting. It kind of works. I don't know. I mean, you guys should try it. It's kind of far out. You just point your finger at the sky. You pick a cloud, and you point your finger at it, and you say, "I will destroy that cloud." And you stare at the cloud, and the cloud will disappear. It's quite far out. Of course, it's an illusion of the mind. I mean, unless human beings really can do that. I don't think they can, but I mean, who knows, right? But yeah, he was a madman. He was a madman, and he ended up in jail, and he died in jail. But his disciples, and why did they arrest him? They arrested him because he was lying to people, saying that he could cure cancer when he couldn't. And apparently the judge ordered that all of his books should be burnt. But nonetheless, his followers picked up his ideas, and this was one of the huge, influences or trains of thought within the sexual revolution of the 60s. And we're living in the shadow of it now. We're living in the shadow of Wilhelm Reich. And this, when I first got involved in the alt-right 10 years ago, everybody was talking about the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism. There used to be a website, Smash Cultural Marxism. This was a term that was everywhere, all over the internet back in 2016. Cultural Marxism, cultural Marxism, cultural Marxism. Everybody was using this term, they're using this phrase. Nobody seems to use it anymore, which is really interesting. It's really interesting to me, because one of the interesting things that came out as I was reading around this documentary in preparation for this video, one of the fascinating things that has occurred is I've discovered that Paul Gottfried was a disciple of Herbert Marcuse, and I didn't know this. So Herbert Marcuse, prominent Jew in the Frankfurt School, right? And as I say, the Frankfurt School, the modern West is kind of built by the Frankfurt School. What is the Frankfurt School? A group of Jewish Marxists who were based in Germany. They were in Weimar, Germany. They wanted Marxism. You have to understand, they were based in Germany in the 1920s. So you just had the revolution, the 1917 revolution in Russia. And they were wondering, why hasn't this happened in the West? Why hasn't this happened in Germany and France and England? And their conclusion was, well, because they're too rich. The bourgeoisie, the capitalist bourgeoisie are too wealthy. And so they thought, well, what are we going to do? Well, it's the long march through the institutions, isn't it? We have to break them first. And how do we break them? Well, let's take the theories of Sigmund Freud and mix them with the theories of Karl Marx. And let's have a sexual revolution first. And let's make them all completely degenerate first. And if we make them all completely degenerate first, we'll break down the family. And then they'll take to communism. And this is the world in which we live now. This is what we live in now. This is what's happening to America right now. Family, life destroyed, LGBT everywhere, transgenderism everywhere. They have apps that help you cheat on your wife. Cheat on your husband now. They have apps. You can get an app. It's amazing, right? Divorce your husband, take all his money, and blah, 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 blah. You know, it's completely degenerate, psychopathic stuff. This is all coming out of Weimar, Germany, and out of the Frankfurt School, out of Marcuse. And as I say, Paul Gottfried was his disciple. And Paul Gottfried was the father of paleoconservatism, a so-called conservative movement. And Paul Gottfried is the guy that influenced the alt-right. He came up with the term alt-right along with Richard Spencer. Are you beginning to see, my dear friends? Along with Richard Spencer. And Richard Spencer, first of all, he's a white nationalist who refuses to acknowledge the influence that the Jews have had on the white race. Like, he just won't talk about it. He'll just completely avoid that subject matter. Secondly, he was against Brexit, so he's the enemy of England. Thirdly, he's economically very left-wing. I mean, he told people to vote for the Democrat Party. Not once, but twice, as far as I remember. I mean, he told everybody to take the vaccine. He's fully on board with that, but also economically very left-wing, in favour of universal basic income, and sexually very liberal. I mean, he likes to hang out with Greg Johnson, right? Are you guys starting to understand the gravity of what I'm saying, my dear friends? Are you starting to understand? He hangs out with Greg Johnson, famous white nationalist, homosexual. Who is Greg Johnson's disciple? Millennial Woes, who runs Millennial. And so you have this whole, who's Millennial Woes' best friend? Morgoth, right? Who's Morgoth? Morgoth is a fan of the Frankfurt School. He likes to read their books and talk about their ideas. Right? They all hate liberalism. They all hate classical liberalism. They're all economically left-wing. And they're all kind of following downstream from this school of thought. So, I mean, I just very fascinating connection. And, 10 years later, as I say, when the alt-right kicked off, when this whole thing kicked off 10 years ago, when I first started getting into dissident right politics on the internet, everybody was talking about cultural Marxism. Nobody talks about it anymore. Why? Because they've embraced cultural Marxism. They're not against it. I can't prove it, guys. I'm just saying, it all seems very, very suspect to me. But I am getting ahead of myself. I'm just trying to kind of show you the gravity of what this documentary is all about. It's really, it's a fundamental documentary. You have to watch this thing, and you have to take a look at it, and you have to understand it. We live in the shadow of Wilhelm Reich and the Frankfurt School. We live in an age of cultural Marxism. That's it. And you have to understand this. And essentially, like I say, when it comes to Freud's theories of the unconsciousness, for the first part of the 20th century, it was all about suppressing your conscious, suppressing all these bad desires that are inside you. And then it switched, and it became about expressing all the desires. Very much reminds me of E. Michael Jones with his Libido Dominandi. He's talking about Samson, and he's talking about how the elites, how the elites use your sexual desires to control you. Because sexual desire is a very powerful thing, and so you end up following your sexual desires. You think that you're free, but you're not really free. It's like a drug addict. He thinks he's free because he's taken a drug, but he's not really free. He's addicted to the drug. In the same way, you think you're free by following this path of sexual liberation, but you're not really. You're just being chained and bound by your carnal desires, which is what has happened to us. We think we're free by indulging in vice, but we're actually chained by our vice. Really, the nature of humanity is that it's the city of God. It's the city of men. You either serve God or you serve your genital, right? You either serve something. You either serve a higher ideal and you strive towards that higher ideal, or you serve your carnal desires. But you will serve. You will serve. There is no real freedom for us, and it seems that we've forgotten that. But we are being chained by our vices, and the capitalist corporations that rule over this absolutely understand this. They watch us, they observe our behavior, they listen to all of our conversations and our Google searches, and it all goes into an algorithm. They create the metadata, they tailor the advertisements for you, and they get you addicted to stuff so that you can buy their products, and also so they can keep you docile and under control. This is what's going on. But anyhow, I digress. Let's try and go back again to the story. So Sigmund Freud, he has all these crazy theories back in Vienna, back in the day, even before the First World War. And his theories were not accepted by the elites. They didn't like it. In the Belle Epoque, when European culture conquered the entire world, the Europeans essentially followed a culture of stoicism. You hide your emotions. You don't cry in public. You don't tell your weaknesses to people. You bottle it all up and you march on. You keep a stiff upper lip and you march on. This is how we conquered the world. Freud was saying the opposite. Freud was saying, he's like the thin end of the wedge. He's like, just let a little bit out, I suppose. Like, go to a therapist, let a little bit out. I mean, the whole Freudian thing is very strange. The whole idea of confessing. Essentially, it's a very Catholic idea. You have to understand Vienna, Catholic city, right? But obviously, the Christians and the Catholics would never admit this. But I think the whole Catholic idea of confessing your sins to a priest is just very strange. Why would you want to do this? Why would a priest want to listen to all of your shit in the first place? Right? Excuse my French. It's not something that especially if you're a celibate priest and you're going to sit there and you're going to listen to somebody come up and they're telling you, I've done this, I've done that, and blah, 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 and you're supposed to just like forgive. Because I've practiced celibacy before. I was celibate for 6 years. And I can tell you, if you're celibate, you don't want to listen to somebody else banging on about their sex life. It's nuts. No wonder so many priests fall down and they get married or they get girlfriends or whatever it is. So I think the whole thing's flawed. I mean, it just seems... I'm just very suspicious of that whole... It seems like a Catholic spy network. A Catholic, medieval spy network. Because you can imagine, back in the old days, like everybody in Europe would be telling all of their secrets to the priests. So the priests would know everything. And who got very, very wealthy and powerful in the medieval period? Oh, let me think. The priests ended up with like all the property, or not all, but like a quarter of the land was like owned by monasteries and cathedrals and so on and so forth. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was a beauty to it. They built some beautiful cathedrals and they were channeling people's energies towards something divine, towards God. I do believe in God. So it's in many ways better than the system that we have now, where our desires are just being channeled in the opposite direction down to Slaanesh. Right? Our elites worship Slaanesh now, and they worship Satan, and they worship hell, and they're pointing us in that direction. So, yeah, medieval Christianity was better than that, okay. But nonetheless, I mean, let's be honest, it was a spy network. And the Pope gained a lot of power from this, and the Pope was always playing these power games between the elites. And I'm sure there were a lot of dumb, naive, princes. I mean... Think about it. You're a king in the medieval period, and you're trying to pull various different power moves. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell everybody in your court, like, don't tell the priest this? Like, don't confess this, whatever it is, to the priest. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if you want to know what your enemy's doing, all you got to do is get the church on your side, and then... the priests are going to tell you, like, whatever, they'll get the information from the confessions, they can put it together, right? The little details, they can figure it out. That's your spy network. The Catholic Church will never admit this. And I've never seen anybody else really point this out, but I mean, that's just what it looks like to me. And I can see that's what it looks like, because that's obviously how it's playing out in the modern day with therapy. Okay, I'm going to have to do a video at some point about Libido Dominati, because it's a very interesting book by E. Michael Jones, and this is kind of like my reaction to it, because I know I'm going on a tangent here, but whatever, it is related. But basically he talks about the Bohemian Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, and Adam Weishaupt, and how he was raised as a Jesuit. And he used this kind of a Jesuit confession technique to create the Illuminati. And in the Illuminati, people would confess to the people that were above them. And so the guy at the top would get all the secrets and he would use it to control people. And that's what the Bavarian Illuminati was like. And he was just... So in the book, the point is made that they took this tradition of confession and they twisted it round. And in the book, the point is made that this is essentially what Freud was doing, and what modern day social media is doing, and what the modern day spy network is doing. They're all listening to us and they're taking our information, and etc., etc. So once you see that they're using this confession in the modern world as a spy network, you can see, well, obviously that's what they were doing in the ancient world as well. I don't want to go on an anti-Catholic tirade, but it's just like, come on, guys. Like, I saw Fuentes talk about this the other day. Like, Thomas Aquinas said that the Jews have a special place and they should be protected because they are a witness race, I think is the term they used, because they witnessed Jesus. So the Jews like to make out that in the medieval period they were persecuted and pogromed and so on and so forth. And yeah, that happened sometimes, but they were also very, very wealthy, and they were the moneylenders, and they were the spies, and they had a position of power. And whereas the Christians just killed and forcibly converted all the pagans, they left the Jews alone, right? So that guy that's worshipping Odin in the forest, no, we're going to burn him and chop his head off. But the Jew who literally hates Jesus, no, we'll leave him alone. This is the hypocrisy of the medieval period. The Jews were a protected race. Sorry if that hurts your feelings if you're a Catholic, but it's true. But anyway, bit of a tangent. The point, my dear friends, is that Freud was kind of it came along as a reaction to all of that. So he kind of like, instead of confessing to the priest, now you're confessing to the therapist. I also feel like it's gaslighting on a massive scale, because Freud is basically telling people that they're mad, right? He's like, oh, you have these carnal desires inside you. You want to have sex with your mum. You want to murder your father. You've got penis envy. I mean, it's just a bunch of weird shit. It's just like, again, I don't want this to be an anti-Christian rant, but I did try reading Saint Augustine's Confessions, and it I found it to be unreadable, and I felt I read Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, which I haven't done a video on yet. I think I may just go through the whole book chapter by chapter, to be honest with you, just so I can really properly understand the concepts. But nonetheless, I mean, Saint Augustine, he talks about Saint Augustine in the book, and he mentions how like he's guilty about this peach tree or whatever, and he's blabbing on for pages and pages about how guilty he is. And it seems to me like the Catholic Church just took this book and then they pushed all of this guilt onto the masses, and told the masses, oh, you're bad, you have original sin, you've got all these bad desires, blah, 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 blah. And I think it's awful. I think it's a terrible way of treating people. I'm glad that we're free from that tyranny. And it just seems to me like Freud's just doing the same. It's the same trick, sort of thing. It's just, oh, you've got bad desires. You've in your subconscious mind, you're thinking about cannibalism and murdering people and raping and killing, and you're an animal. And it's like, well, hang on, Freud, like, excuse me, is that true? Can you prove that it's true? Oh no, you can't. So it's like the old case, so it's the old story of like, people should be innocent until proven guilty. You shouldn't just go up to people and say, oh, you've got all these bad desires, but you don't know that you've got all these bad desires because they're in your subconscious mind, but they're there lurking underneath. Like, come on, Freud, do me a favor, leave me alone, stop it with this nonsense. But this is his philosophy, like, this is psychoanalysis, and I mean, it's like a lot of, like, the best of lies, there's always an element of truth. That's how these people, even Marx, there's an element of truth. Is there a class war? Yeah, there's a class war. The whole of English history is a story of a class war. It's the story of the Saxons slowly rebelling against Norman tyranny, slowly rebelling against the aristocracy. So yeah, it's a class war. You can read Livy's early history of Rome. It's the plebs versus the patricians. It's a class war. So Marx isn't wrong to say there's a class war, but he just takes that element of truth and then kind of like turns it into some weird utopian dream. In a similar way, Freud's not wrong to say that there is a subconsciousness, but because obviously there are things and symbols and rituals that affect us in ways and that we don't understand. But he just takes that and then he makes it really weird, right? This is what these Jews do. They just take a basic... They see like a little crack in the armor and then they just exploit that and then they make it really weird. So, but this is... So Freud came along. His theories were not popular with the elites in Austria. They didn't like his ideas, but nonetheless, he had his little thing going on. And then the First World War came along and he was horrified by it. And he kind of advocated for repression of these desires. But Eddie Bernays was his nephew. And Eddie Bernays, the father of propaganda, the father of advertising, really, in America. I mean, the whole Freud... I'm going to have to do another video and just talk about the Freud family. in depth because it's a very weird family. You got Freud, you got Eddie Bernays, you got Anna Freud, and then of course you've got Lucian Freud, I think his name is, who's the weird artist in England with some horrible demoniac pictures, and then of course you've got Netflix, the founder of which was from the Freud family apparently. So weird, interesting family. But anyway, Eddie Bernays, who was his cousin or nephew or something, nephew I think, promoted Freud's ideas in the West and brought his ideas to the West. And he used Freud's ideas to become very popular and successful. He promoted psychoanalysis in the West. It became a big thing in New York. And he did a lot of interesting things. Bernays is a big part of this documentary is just all about Bernays and his exploits. First of all, he was hanging around with Woodrow Wilson, which is fascinating in of itself. For people that watch this channel, I'm a great believer that we live in the age of Wilsonian idealism, right? This is one of my favorite phrases, to say that we live in the age of something, but we do. We live in the age of Blair. We live in the age of Wilhelm Reich. We live in the age of Wilsonian idealism, and it's just true. We live in the shadow of these ideas. That's how it works. But I think I just always faff his name up. Woodrow Wilson is the father of the New World Order. He's the guy that created the Fed, so the Federal Reserve, the dollar, right? 1913. That's all tied up with the Titanic, in case you don't know the story. But that's the great conspiracy behind the Titanic, because there are some people that were against it. They got on the Titanic, and the Titanic sank, and they died, and the Fed came in. But anyhow, he's the father of the New World Order. He had this idea. I want to build a New World Order. What is the New World Order? Well, first of all, it's the America ruling the world instead of the British Empire and the European empires. Okay, because America is the New World. Okay, and secondly, it's this Kantian idea. The idea of Immanuel Kant. I've got the book right here. I'm going to review it soon. It's called On Perpetual Peace. Not a very long book. Kant probably wasn't the first to have this idea. I think it goes back a long way. But the idea is that you can have world peace through democracy. So you have, if every country in the world is a republic, and if every country in the world is voting, then there'll be world peace, right? And because people usually don't vote to go to war, right? So it's idealistic. It's not realism. I am a realist. I am a Malthusian realist. I follow Thomas Malthus, principles of population. I think that we're always going to run out of food, and people are always going to kill each other, and so there's always going to be war. There will always be a battle for resources, and that's just the way things are. But the idealistic, that's kind of the realist view of politics. But the idealistic view is that, we can have world peace, and we've got these ideals of peace and love, and if only we can just strive together, we can, that's the age that we live in, guys. The British Empire has gone, and most countries in the world are democratic, and most countries in the world want world peace. Like, the idea that you could just go and conquer another country is just considered to be barbaric now, whereas a century and a half ago is considered to be normal. So the point I'm making is that psychoanalysis, Eddie Bernays was all tied up with Woodrow Wilson. When Woodrow Wilson went to Europe at the end of the Second World War at the end of the First World War to promote his 14 points and his peace plan and the creation of the League of Nations and all of that, Bernays was at his side, helping him and encouraging him, and pushing this propaganda and pushing America as this liberator, and etc., etc. So he's all tied in with the New World Order. He's also connected to the CIA. Iran was the first country that the CIA overthrew, but the second one was Guatemala, Am I saying that right? Yeah, Guatemala. Silly word to pronounce, but anyway, the CIA overthrew that country. Why? There was a company, United American Fruit, I think it was called. Guatemala was essentially a banana republic, so they made bananas, and they were run by a dictatorship, and they'd sell the bananas to America, and the profits would go to America because America owned the company that ran the country, right? And so a leader came along who was fairly elected, and he said, no, this is no good. We shouldn't be giving all of our profits to America. We should be keeping some of the profits to ourselves. We want to nationalize this company, and yada, yada, yada. Bernays helped the CIA to overthrow this guy by creating a fake news agency that spread anti-American rhetoric coming out of Guatemala, by portraying the leader of Guatemala as a dictator when actually he wasn't, as a communist dictator when he wasn't at all. And he even got together a mob, some kind of protest mob or what have you. And so he was deeply involved in that. This is also later after the Second World War, because Nixon went down there, I think. But nonetheless, he was involved with the CIA overthrowing Guatemala. He was the guy. What else did Bernays do? Bernays famously got women to smoke. Women never used to smoke. It was a taboo against it. He did some psychoanalysis, asked women why they weren't smoking, came to the conclusion that basically he managed to tie smoking up with the suffragettes movement and with women's liberation movement, right? And he called the cigarettes torches of freedom. So now if you're a woman and you smoke, you're liberated. You're liberated. You're free. You're not following this taboo. That tells you shouldn't smoke. It's only men that smoke. No, you're free. You can smoke. So he got women to smoke. How many millions have died because of him? Right? Does he care? No, he doesn't. And this is another side point that I'd like to make about this this whole documentary, which is that the century of self is, of course, also the century of women voting. Okay, Adam Curtis doesn't talk about this at all, because he's a lefty, but obviously women got the votes, and they got more money, and they got more power, and now all the corporations are basically selling stuff to women. That's what it's all about. They are the number one consumers. And of course, women are much more emotional, so they're much easier to manipulate through psychology. So this is a whole thing. So it's not just that the psychologists and Freud and the psychoanalysts and the Jews and what have you took over the media, and the elites are using emotions to manipulate people. I mean, that is going on, but also a big part of the story of the 20th century is that we gave women the vote. And so women are just susceptible to this stuff. But this documentary doesn't point that out at all. Which is just kind of funny. But the main drive of the documentary is just to point out how there's a lot of things that are being said here, but one of the main drives is just to point out how, like, before the 20th century, the American consumer was interested in buying things that he needed. Luxuries were a thing that rich people bought. Ordinary people didn't really buy this. In fact, one of the problems they had was overproduction. It's kind of funny. Things we just don't produce anything anymore, right? But they were people that ran the factories and so on and so forth. They were worried because they were making too much stuff and there'd be nobody to buy it. And how did they solve that solution? Well, they changed the American consumer from one who buys things that he needs to one who buys things that he wants. Right? And Bernays played a big part in this. And Bernays also played a big part in pushing up the stock market bubble of the 1920s. Because he was also encouraging people to invest in the bubble and because there's the boom of the 1920s came about in part because of Bernays' propaganda and the advertising propaganda, which changed again. Women got the votes, and that was a big part of it. This changing attitude, but that's not mentioned in the documentary. But whatever, a lot of people started buying a lot of stuff in the 1920s, right? Because of this new kind of advertising marketing, which just kind of like bombarded people and said, don't just buy things you need, buy things that you want as well. Buy luxury goods, just buy things, become a consumer. Right? Birth of consumerism, really, in the 1920s. So huge stock market boom because of that. Bernays was all tied up in that. Of course, that crashed and what have you. So very influential and interesting guy. And so then the documentary talks about, but also very pro-American. He wasn't anti-American. He did think everyone was stupid, and he called everybody stupid. So he looked down on the American people, but he was, you know, I know he's obviously Jewish, but he wasn't. He didn't hate America. He wasn't a communist. His whole attitude was that people need to be controlled, people need to be manipulated, and the elites and people are too stupid to vote the right way, so they've got to be manipulated and pushed in the right direction so they vote in the right way. Essentially, that was his whole attitude, and this was the kind of like the attitude that the elites took. It became no longer as a matter of, this is my manifesto, this is my 12-point manifesto, vote for me and I will give you this. No, it became a matter of mob psychology. Right? You want to get elected, you appeal to the emotions of people, not to their rational mind. It's much easier to appeal to emotions. Of course, this is an ancient thing, by the way. The documentary kind of makes out this is like a new thing that Bernays created. No, of course, they knew this back in Greek times. It's just that the Jews are the ones that kind of brought it back, right? It's also a rejection of Enlightenment values, which is all about all about the rationality. People will vote for the right thing. But that's Bernays. And then the documentary talks about Anna Freud, daughter of Sigmund Freud, right? This is kind of weird and disgusting. But anyway, Freud psychoanalyzed her and to stop her from masturbating, right? Like, how weird is that, right? How fucking weird is that? And interestingly enough, she became a lifelong virgin. And she became like the leader of psychoanalysis after Freud died. And she kicked out Wilhelm Reich from the psychoanalyst movement or society, because Wilhelm Reich had these ideas, that the orgasm will liberate you and so on and so forth. So this is one of the origins of this split. And she was just a weird, dark woman, and she got involved with this divorced millionairess, whose name I forget, and I can't bother to look it up. But she got involved with this divorced millionairess who went and lived with her in London. She's an American. Went and lived with Anna Freud in London, and Anna Freud is the pioneer of child psychology, right? And so she psychoanalyzed these children from when they were very, very young. And they grew up, and they were, on the surface, they were kind of respectable and successful. And they were considered to be models of the success of psychoanalysis. How you can just mold the perfect kind of person. What you got to understand, the documentary is making the point that before the Frankfurt School came along and turned everything on its head, the idea that the elites had, the idea that the psychoanalysis movement had, was that you have to make people into docile consumers, right? Otherwise they'll rebel and there'll be violence and there'll be the First World War and the Second World War and blah 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 blah, right? So you've got to keep people docile. So it's all about like bundling up your emotions. And these children that Anna Freud psychoanalyzed since from birth were considered to be great examples of this. The problem is, one of them ended up being an alcoholic, getting divorced. The other one literally committed suicide. She came from America and she killed herself in Freud's house. And this was a huge scandal, and people were upset by this, obviously, and it was considered to be a massive failure. And then at the same time, Marilyn Monroe, she had a Jewish psychoanalyst that she was involved with. She ended up committing suicide. So people started to lose faith in psychoanalysis because of this. It seems to me that, I mean, obviously I'm not into psychoanalysis, and I think it's a lot of mumbo jumbo, and I would never go to a therapist. But regardless, it seems to me that it's difficult to control people on an individual level, but on a mass level, it seems to be much easier. That's one lesson which I've got from this documentary. But regardless, that kind of set things up for the rejection of the whole psychoanalytical movement that came about in the 60s when Wilhelm Reich and the Frankfurt School became popular, and they were like, no, we will not repress our emotions anymore. We will explode our emotions everywhere. And no, we don't want to be consumers. They realized, they understood that these people are turning Americans into consumers, and they wanted to rebel against it. And I'm kind of on their side a little bit, to be honest with you. I mean, I've always been sympathetic to the hippie movement, because the hippie movement has always been an extension of the Völkisch movement. And the Völkisch movement came out of Romanticism. It appeared in Germany. Guido von List, I think, was one of the leaders of it. And it's this idea that you should go off into the mountains and you should practice sunbathing and naturalism and eat healthy food and exercise and go back to a kind of like medieval style of living. People don't realize this, but sunbathing was a German thing. And these people came over to California, and they were known as Nature Boys. And the Nature Boys are the predecessors of the hippie movement. So I've always been sympathetic. I mean, I am essentially a Luddite. I am a fan of Ted Kaczynski. I did a video on Ted Kaczynski, but YouTube deleted it, so you're not allowed to talk about that. But at the end of the day, I'm not a fan of modern technology. That's why I support open source technology. That's my compromise. Can't get rid of the technology, but you can use Linux. But anyway, the point I'm making is I'm sympathetic to the hippies and their rebellion against this very corporate America. Of course, it all ended in disaster, but whatever. But a lot of these people reject it. They said, well, we don't want to be consumers. We don't want to be brainwashed by the man just to buy stuff. We're going to rebel. We're going to grow our hair long, and we're going to go and we're going to grow our own food, and we're going to go back to nature. And it was a youthful rebellion, and it was inspired by Wilhelm Reich and by others, and this is the turning point, so to speak. And the documentary talks about the Weathermen, right, led by Bill Ayers, not Jewish, but his wife was, right? So Bill Ayers and his wife, I mean, they organized the Days of Rage in Chicago. They organized this big rebellion against the government, and they were angry about some nonsense, whatever. They got totally crushed by the government, and that was kind of like the end of like the student uprising. And people said, "Whoa, dude, can't fight the man." And so instead, the personal became political. And so they adopted the conclusion that actually, instead of overthrowing the government, let's just like smoke weed instead. And no, the idea is like, if we change ourselves, then society will change automatically, which, by the way, is true. It kind of worked, actually. They didn't feel successful at the time, but obviously the boomer generation came along and just totally wiped everything aside. So I don't know whether that's a white pill or a red pill, or a black pill, or what it is, but it is kind of true. If you change people's opinions, then you win. If you take the youth, then you win. I mean, this is why people like Fuentes is important. Like, even though I don't really personally like the guy, I think he's a bit of a fraud. But the Republican Party on the lower levels, I mean, they're all groypers. The next generation of Republicans are all groypers and followers of Fuentes. That's just a fact. They don't like Israel. Same here in England. Like the Zoomer generation, they're all based and red-pilled, and they're all basically ethronats. So we have one in that regard. The only question is, will, like, have we just run out of time? Because obviously Texas is turning brown, and it may just be too late. The demographic battle has already kind of been lost, unfortunately. But anyhow, yeah. So they had the Chicago riots, and so instead the hippies were like, well, the personal is political now. Let's just do that instead. And so you have, what's this thing called? It's called the Ashland Institute, something in California. All wrapped up with the human potential movement. Some psychoanalysis guy called Fritz Perls there, and they just did some crazy stuff. But essentially, the human potential movement, it's like they were inspired by psychoanalysis, and they were also inspired by Wilhelm Reich, and they were also inspired by yoga and Tai Chi and all these Eastern ideas, and they kind of like mixed it all together. And they wanted human potential to explode. Everyone would become like a transhuman, a superhuman, a yogi, or something like this. Everyone can be psychic. Everyone can have their third eye opened. So this was a big part of the hippie movement. And then out of this, another guy appears called Werner Erhard. Probably a lot of guys I don't think this ever blew up in England, but I went to America and I met some guys that are into this. But it's like it's a seminar, and you go to the seminar and there's a group of people, and then they lead you through these psychological techniques as a group, and the idea is that you break down the self so that you can rebuild it. And it's kind of weird. It's kind of crazy. So the documentary talks about that, and then we come full circle, and then we come back to Reagan getting elected, and we come back to they're talking about how Reagan, like, how they had these questionnaires. So they, I guess this is the beginning of metadata. Like they started to use computers to analyze, like, what types of people are voting for what, and so they sent questionnaires out to people to get their psychological profile, and apparently this helped Reagan get elected. And then we move on, and then we talk about the focus groups being used in politics, and then we talk about Clinton, and then we talk about Blair, and now we've come full circle at the end of the video. So that's what this 4-hour documentary is all about in a nutshell, basically. But go and watch it. Don't take my word for it. It's you can watch this video as a recap, I suppose, or an analysis, but because there's a lot of information there, and you've got to go over it several times. But essentially, the elites are using our subconsciousness, and they're using these techniques to control us and to brainwash us, and they're very successful at it. And this is the story of the 20th century. And it started off with repressing people's desires, and then it moved on to, no, people should express their desires and explore their desires, which is where we're at now. We live in the Weimar Republic. The whole world lives in Weimar America. We live in the shadow of the Frankfurt School. We live in the shadow of even critical theory. This is another thing which popped up. I didn't realize that critical theory came from the Frankfurt School. Kind of stupid, I know, but I mean, I've just always blocked all that. This whole talk of intersectionality, right? It's part of critical theory. I think I looked it up. It's like, it comes from critical race theory or whatever, but it's a subdivision of critical theory, which comes from the Frankfurt School. So all this leftist plublub that's people are spouting, it's all coming from the Frankfurt School. And yet you don't see a strident, you just don't see it on the internet anymore. Like I say, back in 2016, everybody smacked. Let me look it up, actually. Yeah, I just Googled it. The old Smash Cultural Marxist website has disappeared. They've got a small thing on Twitter with like 40 followers, and that hasn't posted anything since 2019. So yeah, that meme just, yeah, it just died. Like the old 2016 meme of white genocide died as well. I mean, that was the thing. That was the thing. 10 years ago, everybody was pushing this white genocide, white genocide. This is the word that we have to use. This is what people have to understand. It was very raw. It was a very raw, red pilling, in your face term, and that dropped out. And I watched it happen. I watched they people started saying, "Oh, white genocide. It's too abrasive. We have to use the Great Replacement instead." And so they started using the Great Replacement, and now nobody talks about white genocide anymore. I mean, I guess people are talking about mass deportations now, so it's not all bad, but it's just interesting to watch how terms come in and they go out. And if I just remember, like, getting involved with this thing in the beginning, there was a lot of kind of libertarian spirit in the thing, and then somewhere along the line there was like a switch, and Keith Woods got really popular. He's totally a word salad type, Frankfurt School type, German idealist type waffle machine. It's the same as Richard Spencer, same as Morgul, same as all these people. They're not really coming in the tradition of English thinking, of Anglo thinking, right? So I mean, you can make what you want of that. It's simply an observation. I'm sure all these people do care about the white race, but it's an observation. Okay, there you go. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, and that's it. That's all I've got to say. Thank you. Goodbye.